My name is Deborah Kane, and for 30 years I was the quiet backbone of a pharmaceutical company you've probably never heard of, but whose medications likely sit in your bathroom cabinet. I wasn't the kind of person you'd see giving TED Talks or shaking hands at investor summits. I was the one making sure those glossy annual reports were built on actual, FDA-compliant work. I joined the company when it was just a modest firm with 2 regional labs. Back then, my job title was something like Regulatory Assistant Level I, which basically meant I read every word of every label, cross-checked clinical trials, and stayed late to fix mistakes no one else would have caught. Over the years, I became Senior Director of Quality Assurance, and the only reason the word senior wasn't dropped from my title was because, in truth, no one could do what I did as well or as quietly. I didn't play politics. I never had to. My work spoke for itself. While others lobbied for visibility, I became indispensable in silence. Colleagues came and went, divisions merged, departments got rebranded with flashier names, but I remained. Not because I was stuck, because I knew this industry inside out. I kept clean records, prepped regulatory filings for billion-dollar drug approvals, and trained 5 different generations of junior staff who now run half the place. When a product faced a recall risk, it was my email they were all waiting for, not the CEO's, mine. I wasn't someone who made a fuss. I didn't go out for drinks after work. I didn't forward memes or post corporate selfies. I kept a framed photo of my daughter on my desk and kept my head down. After my husband passed away 6 years ago, work became my structure. Not a distraction, my spine. Every morning I arrived at 6:45, 15 minutes before the building even turned on the lights. I brought my own tea. I never missed a deadline. I never missed a single day. I didn't expect parades. I didn't want celebrations. But after 3 decades, I thought I had earned at least the right to walk out on my own terms. My pension agreement stated that once I hit my 30-year mark, my full vesting would kick in. 82% of the company's match contributions would become irrevocably mine. I had 3 days to go. Monday was the milestone. After that, I could have walked away with peace of mind, maybe bought a small cabin up north, opened a consulting firm part-time, visited my daughter more often. 3 days. But that Friday, at exactly 3:14 p.m., there was a knock on my office door. It was gentle, almost courteous. I remember how absurdly polite it sounded. I looked up and saw Amanda from HR standing beside a man I had seen only in internal memos, David Wells, the new CEO, just appointed 6 months ago. He wore that calculated kind of smile people practice in mirrors, crisp navy suit, no tie, a gold pin on his lapel that didn't mean anything. "Debra," he said like we were old friends, "can we have a quick word?" They closed the door behind them, and the silence that followed was almost ceremonial. Amanda sat in the corner chair, holding a folder against her lap like a shield. David took the guest seat across from me, not bothering to remove his blazer. He crossed one leg over the other and leaned in just slightly, in that performative way corporate men do when they want to look like they're being real. I already knew something was wrong. You don't get a surprise visit from HR and the CEO at 3:14 p.m. on a Friday unless a storm is about to break, and I'd seen enough storms to recognize the smell in the air. "First of all," David began, "I want to thank you for your incredible contributions to this company. 30 years. Deborah, that's extraordinary. It's rare these days, truly." I didn't answer, I just looked at him. He paused, expecting some gracious smile, some reciprocal gratitude. When I didn't offer it, he glanced at Amanda, who opened the folder with a rehearsed sort of motion. "I know this may come as a surprise," he continued, "but as part of our restructuring efforts, under the new strategic vision, we've had to make some very difficult decisions." There it was, the phrasing that tries to sound like it hurts the person saying it. Restructuring, strategic vision, difficult decisions, corporate language so diluted it almost tastes like nothing. I felt it before he said it. I was about to be erased. Not thanked, not transitioned, just erased. "Effective immediately," Amanda said, voice even but soft. "Your role is being eliminated. This decision is not a reflection of your performance. In fact, we're incredibly grateful for your years of service. But the organizational chart is evolving, and we're moving toward a more agile model." An agile model, they always use that one. She slid the papers across my desk. A pre-written separation agreement. an NDA, a waiver of any legal claims, 1 week of severance for every year worked, but with a quiet clause at the bottom. I wouldn't qualify for pension vesting since the termination came before the official 30-year threshold. I stared at that clause for a long moment. My hands were still, my breath shallow. It wasn't just about the money, though it was a lot of money. It was the theft of time. 30 years, and they had timed it to the week. Not even a mistake. This had been scheduled, calculated, planned. I looked at Amanda. She couldn't meet my eyes. She kept glancing at her shoes like they might offer her a way out of the room. David, on the other hand, was watching me carefully, not with cruelty, but with detachment, like someone monitoring a lab experiment. "Is there anything you'd like to say?" he asked, as if this were a conversation, as if I were still a participant in my own fate. I said, "Nothing. What do you say to people who've already decided what you are worth and timed your dismissal like a tax deduction?" He took my silence for agreement. "You'll have 30 minutes to collect your personal items. We've arranged for someone from facilities to assist you." Assist me, as if I couldn't carry my own damn things. I reached for the pen, not because I accepted, but because I knew better than to fight in the moment. They wanted a scene, they wanted outrage, or begging, or God forbid, tears. I would give them none of that. I signed, stood, and shook neither of their hands. I walked out of that office with my spine straight, the folder under my arm, and my eyes dry. An hour later, I sat down to my desk. Outside, the receptionist looked up, with wide eyes, already knowing. News spreads fast in offices like these. My screen access had already been deactivated. My badge no longer worked at the elevators. A young intern, Emily, I think, was waiting with a cardboard box for me at my desk. She smiled nervously and gestured toward the cubicle I had worked in since before she was born. It didn't take long to pack. I had never cluttered the space. A few books, a plant, my daughter's photo. My badge sat on top of it all like a tombstone. When I turned around, I saw David walking the floor with a younger woman, tall, maybe 30, stylish in that LinkedIn kind of way. He was pointing at desks, talking animatedly. She nodded and laughed at something he said. She would be my replacement, or rather the new Director of Product Quality Strategy Enablement, or whatever they decided to call the carcass of my former role. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't look back. I walked past the floor I helped design, past the team I helped build, past the framed awards I never asked for. At the lobby, I handed the box to the facilities guy, told him I'd take it from there, and walked into the sun. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for a long while. I didn't cry, not yet. I just sat there, staring at the glass building I had entered nearly every day for 3 decades. My phone buzzed. My daughter had sent a photo of her new clinic's opening sign. She didn't know. No one knew. 3 days. 3 days away from full pension rights after 30 years. They didn't even have the decency to wait until Monday. But I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep, unable to think about anything but that folder. 30 years erased in 30 minutes. My house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of old wood and the hum of the refrigerator. It was the kind of silence that felt like a weight on your chest. I wasn't angry in the traditional sense. I was something else. Something deeper, colder, older. It was the feeling you get when you realize the ground you've stood on your entire life has just quietly opened beneath you. I tried to tell myself to let it go. I had no obligation to fight. It was done. The papers were signed. They had planned it precisely to strip me of my pension, and they succeeded. I was supposed to move on. But as I stared into the dark, the part of me that had survived 3 decades in an industry that eats its own began to stir. I hadn't made it that far by being sentimental. I had made it by paying attention to everything. And now, everything I had observed, documented, and filed away over 30 years started rising to the surface like sediment in a stirred pond. I thought of a meeting from 5 years ago. It had been a closed-door compliance session. We had flagged inconsistencies in the Phase 3 trials for a drug that later became our highest-grossing product. I remembered refusing to sign off on the data package without additional analysis. I'd told David Wells back then, just the head of operations, that we risked FDA backlash. He'd assured me it was under control. When I refused to sign, the document was submitted anyway, without my signature, but with a clean sheet, allegedly approved. I never pushed further. I should have. I knew what happened, and I had let it go because I trusted that the company would do the right thing. Or maybe I just didn't want the war. I got up, pulled on a sweatshirt, and went into the home office I rarely used. My hands moved on instinct. Third drawer on the left, beneath the tax returns and the old printer cables. A black notebook with a blue elastic band. My What If book. I'd started it more than a decade ago, when layoffs had first begun targeting senior employees. Every time something seemed off, every time someone tried to cut a corner, rush a submission, skip a step, I logged it, not because I planned to use it, just because I wanted a record, a log of what I refused to look away from. Flipping through the pages, the entries came back like ghosts. An email chain from 2018 where a junior analyst admitted in writing that the dissolution rates were adjusted to meet the target. A memo from a VP recommending statistical leniency to preserve launch dates. Notes from a conversation where David explicitly asked me not to raise a red flag because optics mattered more than thresholds. I had documented it all. Dates, names, context. I wasn't angry, I was methodical. I made a cup of tea. I read through every page. And then I opened my laptop. My daughter called the next morning, cheerful and unaware. She had just cut the ribbon on her first veterinary clinic. She asked how things were at work. I paused, considered lying, then told her the truth. "They let me go yesterday," I said, keeping my voice steady. 3 days before pension vesting. There was silence on the other end, then a sharp exhale. "What? Mom? Are you serious? After everything you did for them?" I nodded, though she couldn't see it. "I'm fine," I said. "I have a plan." I didn't know the full plan yet, but I knew the first step. I still had my consulting license, set up years ago, mostly to review documents for smaller firms in my spare time. I kept it active out of habit. Now it gave me status, gave me access. I composed a formal letter as an independent compliance reviewer, addressed to a contact I had at the FDA, Karen Salinas. We had worked together briefly during a multi-agency review in 2016. She had once told me, "If anything ever smells wrong, call me." I didn't call. Not yet. I emailed. A brief note. No accusations, no drama, just a flag. A request for a quiet review of drugs ET193's regulatory filings, with a time-stamped copy of the submission package attached. Then I made a second move. I reached out to Daniel Cho, a former compliance officer who had retired last year. He owed me a favor. I asked if he could cross-check the current trial auditing protocols for that same drug under his contacts. He didn't ask why. He said he'd get back to me. By noon, I had a reply from Karen. Short. "Interesting, let me take a look. Can you talk Monday?" I sat back in my chair, feeling the first trace of something I hadn't felt since before David was promoted. Control. Not revenge, not power, just clarity. They had taken something from me, but they had forgotten that I had seen everything, that I had written everything down, that I never deleted emails, that I never let anything slide. For 30 years, I kept my mouth shut because I believed the work mattered more than the people who ran the show. I believed in the medicine. I still do. But now I needed to believe in something else. Myself. I wasn't going to fight them with noise. I wasn't going to post dramatic updates or send angry letters to HR. I was going to do what I always did best. Gather facts, connect the dots, and deliver the truth. Quietly, thoroughly, and with deadly precision. David Wells had planned my exit down to the day. He thought I would go quietly, that I was just a number on a spreadsheet to optimize before the quarter closed. What he forgot was that while he was busy reshaping strategy decks, I was watching, listening, recording, preparing, and now that he'd pushed me out of the building, I was finally free to act without constraint. I made one phone call, not to beg for my job back, but to remind the industry that Deborah Kane was still very much in the game. Monday morning started without ceremony, just like every other workday had for the last 30 years. Except this time I didn't drive to the office. I didn't swipe a badge, I didn't sit at a desk under fluorescent lights. I sat in my kitchen, coffee in one hand, notebook open on the table, laptop already booted. At 9:02 a.m., my phone rang. It was Karen Salinas from the FDA. Her voice was calm, but I could tell she had been digging through files all week. "Deborah, I reviewed the package," she said. "You weren't exaggerating. There are discrepancies in the documentation, missing signatures, altered timestamps, inconsistent batch logs. You're not the only one who's flagged this compound, but your records are surgical." I didn't say much, I just listened. She asked me to send her a formal affidavit, not an accusation, not a complaint, just a technical observation. As an independent consultant, I had every right to flag regulatory concerns. I told her I'd have it to her by noon, and I did. The moment I hit send, something in me shifted. I had always been meticulous, methodical, careful to the point of paranoia. Now that instinct felt like a weapon. Everything I documented, every line I'd written down in that what-if notebook wasn't just history, it was leverage. I wasn't operating from spite. I was operating from evidence, facts that couldn't be rewritten by some polished PowerPoint deck in a boardroom. David and his circle had grown so confident in their insulation and their ability to control narratives, they forgot someone like me could still exist, someone who had quietly built an archive while everyone else chased titles and performance bonuses. Around midday, I got a message from Daniel Cho. "They're scrambling," he wrote. "Heard from a friend inside. Internal audit team got wind of something, and now there's a closed-door meeting scheduled for Wednesday. You kicked the nest." I didn't smile. I wasn't doing this for drama. I was doing it because it was the only thing left to do that felt right. They stole my pension with a calendar trick. I wasn't going to try to undo that with lawyers or emotion. I was going to let the truth walk through the front door without knocking. That afternoon, I logged into my consulting business email and drafted a short update to a few of my former colleagues who had quietly left the company in recent years. People who had trusted me, worked beside me, and also left under suspicious conditions. I didn't say much, just that I was working on a regulatory compliance matter involving ZT-103, and if they had any documentation or insight into trial data irregularities, I'd welcome a conversation. Within 24 hours, I had 3 responses. One of them came with attachments, anonymized lab reports that didn't match the submission summaries in the original filings. The second included a scanned memo from the internal review team dated 2 years ago, raising red flags about patient retention rates and adverse event omissions. The third was a phone call. "I knew something wasn't right," the voice said, "but we were told to keep our heads down. I always wondered why they pushed you out of the loop on that one." So did I. By Wednesday morning, the wheels were moving. Karen sent me an update. "We're initiating a formal inquiry. I can't share details yet, but what you provided confirmed enough to move forward. Just sit tight." I had no intention of interfering. My part was done. I simply opened the door and pointed at the mess they had tried to sweep under the rug. Back at headquarters, David was apparently holding multiple damage control meetings. A friend from the legal team, someone I'd mentored years ago, sent me a one-line message from his personal email. "They know it came from outside, but they don't know who yet." That was fine. I wasn't hiding. I was just quiet. My name was on the paperwork, not in all caps, not in headlines, but where it counted, on the report, in the affidavit, on the chain of custody, every step legally sound, every claim backed by documentation. Thursday brought the first public tremor. An industry newsletter published a piece titled "ZT-193 Faces Regulatory Review After Data Integrity Concerns Emerge." It didn't mention names, but insiders would know. Stock dipped 4% by close of day. I watched it from my living room, with the same detachment I once brought to every product recall I managed over the years. This was the pattern: public awareness, investor panic, internal chaos. On Friday, I received a formal inquiry from the company's general counsel requesting clarification on any previous concerns you may have reported to regulatory authorities regarding proprietary data or submission materials related to your past employment. It was carefully worded, not accusatory, not even hostile, just nervous. That was confirmation enough. They knew. They just didn't know how much I had kept or who else might come forward. I didn't respond, not yet. Instead, I opened a fresh document and began outlining every procedural bypass, every unauthorized edit, every pressure memo I'd quietly documented over the years. I didn't send it anywhere. I wasn't planning a lawsuit. I wasn't even thinking about revenge. I was thinking about clarity, about record keeping, about finishing the story that David thought he'd closed by escorting me out with a cardboard box. They wanted to erase me 3 days before vesting, but in doing so, they freed me to speak, to move, to expose. As long as I was under contract, I had loyalty, not to the company, but to the truth we were supposed to uphold. They broke that, not me. And now, all I was doing was following the same rules I had enforced for 30 years. Only this time, I wasn't bound by their policies. When I closed my laptop that night, I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned. Like the version of myself I had buried under professionalism and diplomacy had finally resurfaced. Not to lash out, but to finish the work I had started a long time ago. David thought he had executed a clean exit, a strategic downsizing, a quiet erasure. What he really did was unlock the door I'd kept closed out of loyalty and give me a reason to open it, with one email, one affidavit, one little thing. By the following Monday, the storm had landed squarely on their doorstep. The company issued a vague internal memo that morning acknowledging a third-party compliance review related to legacy product documentation. No names, no details, but the tone was unmistakable, defensive, nervous, and saturated with carefully engineered language meant to calm investors and suppress internal gossip. But it was too late for that. The moment the FDA inquiry became real, people started talking, and no memo would undo the ripple effect already racing through every corridor, Slack channel, and executive inbox. I heard from Daniel again. They pulled in external counsel, he said. Full document review going back 5 years. Something in your files must have scared the hell out of them. That was the first time I allowed myself the smallest smile. Not because I enjoyed their panic, but because I knew what they were about to discover. For years, I had been the silent safety net in that company. I kept their processes clean. I redlined every shortcut they tried to take and pushed back on every executive suggestion that started with, "What if we just?" They never listened when I said no out loud, but they knew. And now, without me, there was no one left to catch the weight of their own decisions. The timing couldn't have been worse for them. The company was preparing for its annual shareholders meeting. It was the first under David's leadership, and he'd positioned himself as a visionary, the face of agile innovation and cultural reinvention. There had been promo videos, new slogans, even a rebrand announcement with a sleek new logo. But when the news of the regulatory inquiry broke in 2 separate industry journals within 48 hours of each other, everything froze. One of the articles hinted that the whistleblower had worked with the company for decades and had first-hand involvement with the drug's early development and submission protocols. That detail alone narrowed it down significantly. I wasn't hiding, but I wasn't confirming anything. Let them guess. The media started circling. I declined all interview requests. This wasn't about attention, it was about accountability. I watched from a distance as David went on the defensive, holding a brief and clearly uncomfortable press appearance in which he stated that the company is fully cooperating with all inquiries and remains confident in the integrity of its processes. I knew that sentence had probably gone through 3 rounds of legal review before it left his mouth, but I also knew the look in his eyes. I had seen that look before in compliance meetings when someone realized a quiet mistake had become a public crisis. Then came the phone call. Not from David, of course. That would have required humility. It was from one of the board's senior members, a woman named Margaret Ellis. I'd met her once at a compliance retreat in D.C. years ago. She'd remembered me. Her tone was calm but urgent. "Deborah, we've been made aware of your involvement. I'm not here to ask questions you can't answer, but I wanted to extend a professional courtesy. The board is taking this seriously." I let her speak. She asked if I'd be open to a private conversation off the record. I told her I'd consider it. 2 days later, another message arrived, this time from someone in procurement. It was a contract offer. They wanted to retain me as a temporary consultant, to advise on regulatory history, documentation practices, and audit readiness. It came with a generous fee and a full indemnification clause. In other words, they were scared. They didn't want to fight me. They wanted me to help them survive. I didn't reply right away. I wanted them to sweat a little longer. Meanwhile, internally, things were falling apart. 3 directors were removed from their posts. A memo circulated announcing the creation of a new compliance review committee. The marketing department halted all promotional material involving ZT-193. Quietly, the company paused distribution of the drug entirely. You don't do that unless you know what's coming. You don't stop the flow of your bestseller product unless you're trying to minimize damage before the recall hits. I watched the stock drop again, this time 11%. On investor calls, analysts started using words like exposure, integrity concerns, and pending liability. And David? Word was he'd gone radio silent. No more town halls, no more public emails. According to someone in IT, he had booked a private legal consultation the day the story broke. That same someone also leaked that his executive assistant had started cleaning out his office, just in case. I didn't need to orchestrate his fall, he did it to himself. My part had been small, deliberate. I finally responded to Margaret's inquiry. I agreed to a private meeting with her and one board attorney at a neutral location, with my own counsel present. I didn't demand anything, I just listened. They wanted to know what else I had, not to threaten me, at least not directly, but to understand the scope of the damage. I explained that everything I had already submitted to the FDA was factual, properly sourced, and lawfully documented. I told them I had no intention of launching a personal legal suit, but I would not be silenced. The moment they terminated my employment in the manner they did, they broke any trust I had left. Margaret looked tired. She asked me what it would take to make this right. I said I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for recognition, not a public apology, not even reinstatement. But if they expected me to assist with damage control, I wanted to be compensated not only for my time, but for what they took from me. I named a figure calculated precisely to match the pension they had denied me, plus a consulting rate that reflected my 30 years of experience. She didn't flinch, she nodded. I'll take that back to the board. By the end of the week, I had a formal consulting agreement in my inbox, signed and sealed. 6 months with renewal options, full payment up front, no gag clause, and a quiet acknowledgement buried deep in the legal language that I would also be advising on ethical reforms. I knew what that meant. They were cutting David loose. Not because of me, not really, but because of what came to light when I pulled one single thread. I didn't celebrate. I didn't pop champagne or post a victory speech. I just printed the agreement, signed it, and put it in a folder. Then I opened a window, let in the cool afternoon air, and made myself a sandwich. Because sometimes justice doesn't look like a headline, it looks like silence, it looks like order restored. It looks like watching the people who tried to erase you slowly realize you were the foundation all along. And once you were gone, the whole thing began to crack. The official announcement came 2 weeks later. David Wells was stepping down to pursue new opportunities, according to the company's statement. There was no press conference, no farewell message to employees, no celebratory slideshow of his accomplishments, just a 3-line email sent at 4:37 p.m. on a Thursday, buried between an HR policy update and a reminder about security badge renewals. No one said it outright, but everyone knew. He hadn't stepped down, he'd been removed. Quietly, strategically, just like he had tried to do with me. Only this time, he didn't control the narrative. His departure was a consequence, not a decision. A reckoning, not a transition. In his place, an interim CEO was named, someone from the board, a lifer with a reputation for discretion and risk aversion. The shareholders were told that the leadership change was part of a proactive realignment in light of the ongoing regulatory inquiries. Behind the scenes, I knew it was panic management. They needed someone who wouldn't draw attention, who could stabilize the ship while the fire was being extinguished. What they didn't expect was how fast the company's culture began to shift once David was gone. People who had once followed his lead started to step back, reevaluate, speak in quieter tones. A few reached out to me through back channels. "You did what no one else had the guts to," one said. "He thought he was untouchable. Turns out you were the one who couldn't be replaced." I didn't revel in it. If anything, the moment felt subdued. I had spent so long bracing myself for retaliation, for pushback, for consequences, that when none came, I almost didn't know how to feel. I wasn't triumphant. I was tired. But I was also respected, and in my world, that meant more than applause. The consulting work began quietly. I never returned to the office in person. That was part of the agreement. I would provide remote advisement only on compliance structuring, document revision, protocols, and internal ethical frameworks. Essentially, I was being paid to teach them how to undo the damage David had normalized. My name was not on the website, not on the org chart, but every serious decision passed through my inbox. I knew which departments were hiding weaknesses, which processes had been corrupted by speed and optics, and which teams still understood the value of slow, deliberate, accurate work. One day, a senior VP I hadn't spoken to in years sent me a file for review. At the bottom of his email, he wrote, "I'd rather have your red lines than another PR crisis." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get from someone still on the payroll. I took it. What changed most wasn't just the structure, it was the tone. People spoke differently in meetings, less jargon, more caution. The phrase, "Ask Deborah," became a common refrain. They didn't fear me, but they trusted that I wouldn't sugarcoat, wouldn't guess, wouldn't lie. In an environment that had rewarded polish and charisma over substance for so long, my presence, however virtual, acted as a counterweight. Not everyone was happy about it. Some found ways to work around me, but even then, I was a variable they now had to factor in. I had become what David once believed he was, a gatekeeper. Outside of work, my life began to reassemble itself. I had time again, time to visit my daughter's clinic, to walk along the beach in the mornings, to read without scanning for red flags. I spent more afternoons on the porch than I had in years. The money helped, of course, my consulting compensation plus the recognition package they issued to avoid public litigation amounted to more than I would have received through the pension they'd tried to block. That irony was not lost on me. They could have just waited 3 days and paid me what I'd earned. Instead, they rushed to cut ties and ended up writing a much larger check to get me back. Eventually, word reached me that David had resurfaced, tentatively, through a boutique consulting group in New York. No title, no leadership role, just his name listed among the strategic advisors. The phrasing was vague enough to suggest he was still reestablishing himself. A man who had once delivered keynote speeches on innovation was now buried under 2 layers of corporate abstraction. He'd survive, people like him always do. But he wouldn't forget what happened. He wouldn't forget the report he signed on my behalf or the way a single affidavit unraveled his trajectory. He wouldn't forget that the woman he called obsolete had ended up designing the protocol that would now define the company's entire compliance strategy. Whether he hated me or respected me, I didn't care. I wasn't part of his narrative anymore. One afternoon, I received a package. No return address, just a thick envelope sealed with a company crest. Inside was a letter from the interim CEO, acknowledging my contributions to the reform process and inviting me to a private executive roundtable on ethical leadership in pharmaceutical governance. I didn't attend. I didn't need to be in the room to know my influence was already there. I closed my laptop that night and looked out across the horizon, the sun dipping low behind the trees. I thought of all the years I had given them, the birthdays I worked through, the weekends I gave up, the names I remembered, the problems I solved before they became headlines. They tried to make me disappear with a signature and a cardboard box, but they forgot that some people don't vanish. Some people echo. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. I'd taken what was mine, not through force, not through vengeance, but through truth, strategy, and timing, the same tools they had once used against me, only this time I used them better. It's been almost a year since I walked out of that building with a cardboard box and 30 years of silence. Time feels different now, slower, but fuller. I wake up without an alarm. My mornings are quiet. I drink my coffee on the porch, not in the parking lot. And I no longer check emails before the sun rises. My daughter calls me more often, and I answer every time. We talk about her clinic, her patients, her staff. We laugh now, not out of habit or exhaustion, but from a place of ease. My life no longer orbits around a boardroom I helped build but was never allowed to own. Sometimes I still think about those final days, the knock on my office door, the folder, the rehearsed speech, the fake smile David wore like armor. I remember the feeling of being erased, the deliberate cruelty hidden behind words like realignment and strategic vision. But that memory doesn't sting anymore. It's just a mark in the timeline, the place where one story ended and another began. I wasn't supposed to survive what they did to me. That's the part they never said out loud, but it was implied in every decision, every cold glance, every locked door. They expected me to disappear quietly, to absorb the loss like a professional and vanish into irrelevance. Instead, I became something they couldn't ignore. Not loud, not angry, just present. A fact they had to navigate. The company still consults me, not as an employee, not even as a former executive, but as a necessary mind. My name doesn't sit on any brass plaques, but when the hard questions come, they send them to me. I see their faces now on video calls, newer, younger, trying to pretend they aren't intimidated. Some are sincere, others still think in terms of optics and narratives, but they all understand one thing: I don't bluff. I never did. Last month, I received a message from a young analyst, someone I'd trained years ago, fresh out of grad school at the time. She thanked me for how I'd handled the transition, how I held the line without turning bitter, and how that had quietly given others the courage to reconsider their own worth. That message meant more to me than any settlement or contract, because it meant I hadn't just protected the truth, I had passed it on. I went back to the company once, but not for them. A former colleague was retiring, one of the few left from the early days. He asked me to be there, said it would mean something if I came. So I did. I walked through the lobby, past the new branding, the sleek furniture, the rotating digital screens filled with buzzwords. No one stopped me, no one whispered. In fact, more than a few nodded, a few smiled, and one person, someone I didn't even know, said, "You're Deborah, right? Thank you." I didn't ask what for. I didn't need to. Before I left, I stepped outside and looked up at the glass building, the same place that once tried to take everything from me. It looked smaller somehow, not in size, but in significance. It no longer felt like the center of my world. It was just a building, full of people, policies, egos, and history, but no longer holding any part of me that I didn't choose to give. They thought they ended my story, but all they did was remove the leash. I didn't burn anything down, I didn't destroy anyone, I just told the truth and let the weight of their own decisions carry the rest. I got my life back, I got my dignity back, and most importantly, I got to leave on my terms. That's the part they'll never understand. I didn't want revenge, I wanted respect. And in the end, I earned more of it than they ever planned to give, not because I demanded it, but because I proved I never needed their permission to deserve it.